What if humanity's first flight didn't happen in 1903? What if ancient civilizations possessed aviation technology thousands of years before the Wright Brothers? The official history says human flight began at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Two bicycle mechanics, 12 seconds in the air. The birth of aviation. But ancient texts from cultures worldwide describe something very different. Flying machines called Vimanas, aerial battles over ancient India, gods descending from the sky and mechanical crafts, detailed technical specifications for constructing aircraft. These aren't vague myths or poetic metaphors. These are engineering manuals, step-by-step instructions, descriptions of propulsion systems, fuel sources, and navigation equipment. For decades, scholars dismissed these texts as fantasy, pure imagination from primitive cultures who couldn't possibly understand flight. But when engineers actually analyzed these ancient descriptions, something remarkable emerged. The specifications are sound. The designs are aerodynamic. The physics actually work. Documents have been suppressed. Researchers silenced. Translations buried in obscure journals where nobody would notice. Because if ancient humans had this knowledge, it shatters everything we believe about technological progress. Today, we're examining 10 ancient texts that describe flying machines in extraordinary detail. Texts from India, Tibet, China, South America, and the Middle East. Documents that predate modern aviation by thousands of years. Some of these manuscripts include technical drawings. Others describe aerial combat tactics. Several provide maintenance instructions for keeping these machines operational. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight, scattered across museums, university archives, and private collections. Fair warning, what you're about to discover contradicts accepted history. But the texts exist, the translations are verified, and the engineering principles are legitimate. 10 ancient documents that suggest human flight is far older than we've been told. Number 1 takes us to ancient India, and a text that reads like an aerospace engineering manual. The Vaimanika Shastra, a Sanskrit manuscript discovered in 1904 by Pandit Subbaraya Shastri. He claimed it was channeled from ancient memories, but the content is far too technical for simple mysticism. This document describes 32 different types of flying machines. Not vague descriptions, detailed technical specifications. It provides materials for construction, lists 8 types of engines, describes power sources including mercury vortex propulsion, explains how pilots should dress and what they should eat for high-altitude flight. The text divides aircraft into 3 categories based on operational principles. Those that travel from place to place, those that travel from country to country, and those that travel between planets. Each category has specific design requirements. For earthbound craft, it describes lightweight alloys, the exact composition of metals that resist heat and stress, materials that wouldn't be developed in modern metallurgy until the 20th century. The propulsion systems are even more intriguing. One design uses heated mercury in a sealed vortex. As the mercury spins at high velocity, it generates what the text calls a powerful force. This force provides lift and thrust simultaneously. Here's where it gets interesting. In the 1960s, NASA experimented with mercury-based propulsion. The principle was sound. Mercury's unique properties make it ideal for certain propulsion applications. The ancient text described this 3,000 years earlier. Another section details navigation systems, how pilots determine position using solar angles and stellar positions, equipment for measuring altitude and velocity, warning systems for approaching weather. This isn't mythology. These are operational procedures. When aeronautical engineer Josier translated significant portions in 1973, his analysis was startling. The aircraft designs were aerodynamically valid. The propulsion concepts were based on legitimate physics. But mainstream academia rejected his findings. The official position became that the text was a modern forgery, despite being written in archaic Sanskrit. despite describing technology that didn't exist when it was supposedly forged. The manuscript was buried. Josier's work dismissed as pseudoscience. But the text remains, and engineers who study it keep reaching the same conclusion. Somebody, thousands of years ago, understood advanced aviation principles. Whether they actually built these machines or inherited knowledge from an earlier civilization, the technical specifications are legitimate. Number 2 comes from the Mahabharata, one of India's great epics, and it describes aerial warfare in disturbing detail. This isn't a single reference. The Mahabharata contains over 40 passages describing Vimanas in combat. The epic was composed between 400 BCE and 400 CE, though it describes events supposedly occurring thousands of years earlier. The battle scenes are specific, frighteningly specific. Warriors pilot flying machines into combat. These craft shoot projectiles that sound remarkably like missiles. Some Vimanas carry what the text calls celestial weapons, capable of destroying entire armies. One passage describes a weapon that produces a gigantic column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. The heat from this weapon was so intense that warriors jumped into rivers to escape. Their hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause. Birds turned white, and their feet became scarred. Those symptoms align perfectly with radiation poisoning. The text describes how these weapons should never be used except in the direst circumstances, how the blast creates devastation for years afterward, how the land becomes cursed and barren. Another section details an aerial battle between Rama and Ravana. Ravana's Vimana is described as moving as fast as thought itself. It's equipped with weapons that shoot fire. The craft can become invisible to enemies below. It maneuvers in ways that defy the pilots pursuing it. The text provides specific tactics, how to approach enemy Vimanas from the sun to blind their pilots, how to use clouds for concealment, how to calculate trajectory for aerial attacks. These aren't the descriptions of someone imagining magical carpets. These read like tactical manuals for fighter pilots. Dr. V. Raghavan, a Sanskrit scholar from India's Ministry of Education, spent 40 years studying these passages. His conclusion shocked the academic world. The descriptions are too consistent and too technical to be purely mythological. Someone witnessed aerial combat and recorded what they saw. His research was published in a 1979 paper. It received international attention. Then it was systematically ignored. Western academia couldn't accept that ancient civilizations possessed aviation technology. The implications were too disruptive. So the evidence was dismissed. Scholars labeled it mythological poetry. The detailed technical descriptions were called artistic embellishment. But read the text yourself. Judge whether these sound like poetry or documentation. The Mahabharata describes flying machines, aerial combat, and weapons of mass destruction. Thousands of years before humanity supposedly achieved flight. Number 3 takes us to ancient Tibet and a text that describes interplanetary travel. The Kantua and Kantua legends, preserved in Tibetan monasteries for centuries. These documents describe the power of the gods that allowed ancient people to move through the sky, not just locally, between worlds. The texts distinguish between different types of craft: small personal vehicles for short distances, larger ships for transporting goods, and massive vessels for traveling to other worlds in the firmament. One passage describes a journey to the land of the moon. The travelers wear special garments to protect them from the killing cold of the void. They bring containers of air to breathe during the journey. This is 1800 years before modern space travel. The text describes what travelers see from altitude, how the Earth appears as a sphere with blue waters and brown land, how clouds look from above, how stars appear brighter without atmospheric interference. These observations require direct experience. Nobody on the ground could imagine how Earth looks from space. Medieval artists depicted Earth as flat. Renaissance thinkers debated whether it was truly round. But these ancient Tibetan texts describe Earth from orbit. The documents also detail construction materials, a metal called soft silver that doesn't corrode, transparent panels that resist pressure, sealing methods to maintain air inside the vessels. Dr. Ruth Rana from the University of Chandigarh spent years translating these texts in the 1960s. Her findings were revolutionary. The technical descriptions were sophisticated and internally consistent. She identified materials that matched modern aerospace alloys, sealing techniques similar to contemporary spacecraft design, life support concepts that aligned with our understanding of space travel requirements. Her translations were presented to a conference in 1968. The response was fierce rejection. Colleagues accused her of mistranslation, of reading modern concepts into ancient poetry, of allowing imagination to override scholarship. Her academic reputation suffered. Universities stopped inviting her to speak. Her papers were rejected by major journals. The translations exist in university archives, available to anyone who wants to examine them, but they're never referenced, never discussed in mainstream archaeology, because accepting them means accepting that ancient cultures understood space travel. That knowledge was somehow lost, then rediscovered thousands of years later. The official narrative can't accommodate that possibility, so the Tibetan texts remain in obscurity, labeled as mythology, ignored by serious scholars. But the descriptions persist, detailed, technical, consistent, describing technology that shouldn't exist in ancient manuscripts. Number 4 brings us to ancient China and the Feng Huang manuscripts from the Han Dynasty. These documents, dating to 200 BCE, describe aerial vehicles used by emperors and nobility. The Chinese approached this technology differently than Indian texts. Their documents focus on practical applications, transportation, surveillance, communication across vast distances. The Feng Huang texts describe craft that use fire wheels for propulsion, rotating mechanisms that create thrust through controlled combustion. The manuscripts include diagrams showing these wheel assemblies. When modern engineers examined these diagrams in the 1980s, they recognized something remarkable. The designs resembled jet engine principles: air intake, compression chamber, combustion area, exhaust directed for thrust. The ancient Chinese described this configuration 1,500 years before the jet engine was invented. Another section details altitude sickness and how to prevent it. Pilots should breathe from silk bags filled with concentrated air. They should ascend gradually to allow their bodies to adjust. They should monitor certain symptoms that indicate dangerous altitude. This is practical aviation medicine from 2,000 years ago. The texts also mention observation from altitude, using these craft to survey borders, to observe enemy troop movements, to deliver urgent messages to distant provinces. One account describes an emperor traveling from Luoyang to Chang'an in less than a day. That's 500 miles. A journey that normally took weeks. The most intriguing section discusses fuel sources. A mixture of oils and minerals that burns intensely hot. The specific gravity requirements for this fuel. How it should be stored safely. What precautions handlers should take. Dr. Wang Fu from Beijing University analyzed these fuel descriptions in 1986. His conclusion was unsettling. The formula described is chemically sound. The proportions would produce a high-energy fuel suitable for propulsion. He published his analysis in a Chinese academic journal. It was never translated into English, never referenced in Western archaeology, never acknowledged in histories of aviation, because it suggests ancient China possessed knowledge of advanced combustion chemistry. The manuscripts also warn about dangers. Several passages describe accidents, craft that failed mid-flight, fires during ground operations, pilots killed during trials. These aren't triumphant legends of gods soaring through heaven. These read like accident reports from an actual aviation program, complete with safety recommendations and design modifications based on failure analysis. The Feng Huang texts document a sophisticated understanding of flight mechanics, propulsion, and aviation safety. From a civilization that supposedly never flew until the 20th century, number 5 takes us to ancient Babylon and the Epic of Etana, one of the oldest aviation accounts ever recorded. This text dates to approximately 2000 BCE, making it over 4,000 years old. It describes King Etana's journey to heaven on the back of an eagle. The standard interpretation calls this pure mythology, a symbolic tale of divine favor. But read the actual descriptions. As Etana ascends, he looks down and describes what he sees. The land appears smaller, rivers look like narrow lines, the sea becomes like a small pond. These are accurate descriptions of viewing Earth from increasing altitude. Then the text becomes more specific. The eagle tells Etana to look down again. Now the land has become like a hill. The sea appears like a water basin. They climb higher. The land disappears from view. Only sky in all directions. This describes passing through clouds into clear atmosphere above. Nobody on the ground could imagine this. Medieval people believed sky extended forever. They had no concept of atmospheric layers. But this 4,000-year-old text describes it accurately. The eagle in the story might be symbolic. But symbolic of what? Perhaps a flying machine with wing-like structures. The Babylonians could have used eagle as a term for aircraft, the same way we use bird for certain plane models. What's remarkable is the precise description of atmospheric changes during ascent, the diminishing view of land, the changing appearance of geographical features, the transition through cloud layers. These details require actual observation. Archaeologist Zechariah Sitchin analyzed this text extensively in the 1970s. He argued it described actual flight. His theories were controversial. Many of his broader claims were questionable. But his analysis of the Etana text's observational accuracy was sound. The descriptions match what pilots actually see during ascent. The curvature effect at altitude, the flattening of terrain, the changing color of water, the appearance of clouds from above. This text also describes the return journey. As Etana descends, everything reverses. The land grows larger, features become distinct again, they pass back through the clouds. The symmetry of ascent and descent descriptions suggests documentation of real flights. Sitchin's work was rejected by mainstream archaeology. His broader ancient astronaut theories made it easy to dismiss everything he researched. But the Etana text exists independent of Sitchin's interpretations. Anyone can read it. Anyone can note the precise observational details. The epic describes atmospheric perspective, cloud layers, and altitude effects with remarkable accuracy. 4,000 years before human flight supposedly began. The text has been translated dozens of times, always reaching similar conclusions about what it describes. A journey through the sky with detailed observations that require actual flight experience. Number 6 brings us to the Samarangana Sutradhara, an 11th century Indian text that reads like an aircraft operator's manual. King Bhoja compiled this massive work, covering architecture, city planning, and vehicle construction. An entire section is dedicated to flying machines. What makes this text extraordinary is its engineering specificity. It describes the structure of Vimanas using precise measurements, the thickness of hull plating, the spacing of internal supports, the configuration of pilot controls. One passage details weight distribution requirements. The text explains that improper balance causes instability. It provides formulas for calculating load limits based on design and materials. It describes how passenger placement affects flight characteristics. This is aircraft engineering from 900 years ago. The propulsion section is equally detailed. It describes 4 types of engines, each suited for different operational requirements. One type uses mercury sealed in a chamber. The mercury is heated and rapidly rotated. The text states this creates power sufficient to move the vehicle through the sky with the strength of a thunderbolt. Another design uses what the text calls solar energy, a mechanism that converts sunlight into motive force. The description includes mirror arrangements that focus light onto a central chamber. This concept wasn't invented until solar thermal technology emerged in the 20th century. The text also covers combat applications. Vimanas, designed for warfare, have reinforced structures. They carry weapons that shoot fire or projectiles. The manuscript describes armor plating that protects against enemy attacks. It details aerial combat maneuvers, how to approach enemies from advantageous positions, how to evade incoming attacks, how to coordinate multiple Vimanas in formation. These are tactical principles still used in modern air combat. The maintenance section might be most revealing of all. It lists warning signs that a Vimana needs repair, strange sounds indicating mechanical problems, performance degradation that signals component wear, inspection schedules for critical systems. Nobody writes detailed maintenance procedures for imaginary machines. Dr. Dilip Kumar Kanjilal, from Calcutta University, studied this text for over 2 decades. His analysis, published in 1985, was comprehensive. The engineering principles are valid. The mathematical formulas are correct. The operational procedures are practical. His conclusion: this text documents actual aircraft knowledge. The academic response was predictable. His work was labeled fringe scholarship. Universities distanced themselves from his research. The text was relegated to mythology. The detailed engineering specifications dismissed as fantasy. But the Samarangana Sutradhara remains, preserved in Sanskrit, translated multiple times, always describing the same technical details: aircraft construction, operation, combat deployment, and maintenance. From 900 years ago, when humans supposedly couldn't fly, number 7 takes us to ancient Egypt and the mysterious Thule Papyrus, a document that describes a mass UFO sighting over ancient Egypt. This papyrus allegedly dates to the reign of Thutmose III, around 1500 BCE. It was supposedly discovered among papers owned by Alberto Thule, former director of the Vatican Egyptian Museum, in 1933. The text describes circles of fire appearing in the sky. Multiple witnesses observed these objects over several days. The circles were silent. They moved in formations. They glowed brightly, but produced no smoke. The pharaoh consulted with priests and scholars. Nobody could explain what they were seeing. The objects eventually departed, ascending into the sky and disappearing from sight. Here's where this case gets complicated. The original papyrus has never been produced for independent verification. Thule died without revealing its location. The Vatican claims no knowledge of such a document. Critics argue it's a hoax, perhaps created in the 20th century. But the translation that exists describes something intriguing. The objects behaved like controlled craft, not natural phenomena. They maintained formation. They appeared at specific times. They seemed to observe the people below. The description doesn't match meteors, comets, or other celestial events. It describes structured objects under intelligent control. Several researchers have attempted to locate the original papyrus. Prince Boris de Raschwilz claimed to have examined it in the 1950s. He vouched for its authenticity, but he couldn't produce it either. Dr. R. Cedric Leonard analyzed the existing translation in the 1970s. His assessment was cautious but interesting. The language patterns match known Egyptian religious texts from that period. The terminology is consistent with hieratic script conventions. The phrasing suggests authenticity, but without the original document, verification is impossible. This case illustrates a pattern seen repeatedly. Ancient texts describing aerial phenomena exist. Scholars discuss them. Then the originals disappear, or they're hidden in private collections, or they're declared hoaxes without thorough investigation. What happened to the Thule Papyrus? Did Thule actually possess it? Did it get buried in Vatican archives? Was it destroyed deliberately? Or did it never exist? The translation describes objects that sound remarkably like modern UFO accounts: silent craft in formation, bright illumination without combustion, intelligent maneuvering. If authentic, it's evidence that aerial phenomena were observed in ancient times. If a hoax, it's remarkably well crafted to match Egyptian linguistic patterns. The truth about this document remains elusive. But the translation exists. Multiple researchers have examined it, and the description of aerial objects is detailed and consistent. Whether authentic ancient text or clever modern creation, it adds to the pattern of ancient peoples describing flying machines. Number 8 takes us to South America and the mysterious markings of Nazca, Peru, which might be more than art. These aren't texts in traditional sense, but they're a form of documentation. The Nazca lines were created between 500 BCE and 500 CE. Massive geoglyphs etched into desert floor, animals, plants, and geometric patterns stretching for miles. Here's the critical detail. These designs are invisible from ground level. They're only recognizable from significant altitude, several hundred feet minimum. Some designs span over 1,000 feet and only make sense from even higher. Why would ancient people create artwork nobody could see? The standard explanation is ritual purposes, sacred symbols for the gods above. But examine the engineering precision. The lines are perfectly straight over vast distances. The curves are geometrically precise. The proportions are mathematically exact. Creating these designs required sophisticated surveying techniques, and more importantly, the ability to view them from altitude to verify accuracy. Dr. Maria Reiche spent 50 years studying the Nazca lines. She concluded they required aerial observation to create. The precision is impossible without viewing from above. The consistency across miles of desert demands aerial verification during construction. How did the Nazca people check their work? The official theory says they used scale models and careful mathematics. They extrapolated small designs into massive geoglyphs. But the accuracy suggests direct observation from altitude. Some researchers propose the Nazca had primitive hot air balloons. Evidence for this is thin. Some textiles with tight weaves that might hold hot air. Nothing conclusive. But something enabled them to view their work from hundreds of feet up. The geometric patterns are especially intriguing. Trapezoids and triangles spanning miles. Edges perfectly parallel despite massive scale. Several patterns resemble modern airport runways. Flat, cleared rectangles, approaches from different angles. Some theories suggest these were actually landing strips for ancient aircraft. The native Nazca legends describe flying gods who descended from the sky, beings who could travel through the air and observe the land below. Are the lines messages to these flying gods, documentation visible only from their aerial perspective? Or were the Nazca themselves capable of flight, creating these patterns for their own navigation and ceremonial purposes? Dr. Jim Woodman tested the balloon theory in 1975. He built a balloon using only materials available to the Nazca people. It flew successfully. This proved they could have had altitude capability. But it doesn't explain the legends of flying gods or mechanical craft. The Nazca lines represent documentation that only makes sense with aviation. Whether the creators flew themselves or created images for others who flew, the existence of these geoglyphs implies aerial observation. Thousands of years before accepted aviation history begins. Number 9 returns us to India with the Vimanas Shastra, but focusing on its most controversial section, the weapon systems. This portion of the ancient text describes military applications for Vimanas in disturbing detail. 12 types of destructive weapons are catalogued, each with specific effects and applications. The Maricha weapon creates total darkness around enemy Vimanas. Modern military technology includes electromagnetic warfare that disrupts electronics and vision systems. The ancient text describes similar capabilities. The Pramapana weapon apparently generated intense heat. The description mentions it could melt metal structures and cause combustion of materials from distance. This sounds remarkably like directed energy weapons, lasers and microwave systems currently under development by military forces worldwide. The text warns these weapons are dangerous to the operators. Special shielding is required. Pilots must maintain safe distance Improper use can destroy the firing Vimana itself. These are legitimate safety concerns for energy weapons. The Shabda Vedikarana weapon used sound to disrupt enemy craft, high-intensity acoustic waves that could damage structures or incapacitate crews. Military research into sonic weapons has been ongoing for decades. The ancient text described the concept thousands of years earlier, but the most disturbing description is the Brahmastra. This weapon creates a burst of light brighter than 10,000 suns. It produces a catastrophic explosion that contaminates the land for years afterward. The symptoms it causes match radiation poisoning exactly. Hair loss, burned skin, sickness that lingers, land that becomes barren and cursed. The text explicitly warns this weapon should never be used except in absolute necessity. The devastation it causes affects both sides. The contamination persists for generations. This is a nuclear weapon description from ancient India. Dr. Padma Kumar analyzed this weapons section in 1992, a physicist with expertise in military technology. His assessment was shocking. The weapons described are energetically plausible. The effects match known weapons categories. The safety warnings are appropriate for the described systems. Someone understood advanced weapons physics. His paper was rejected by multiple journals, eventually published in a small Indian physics quarterly, never referenced in Western literature. Because accepting his analysis means accepting that ancient civilizations possessed weapons technology comparable to modern military systems. The implications are staggering. Either these weapons were actually built and used in ancient warfare, or this represents inherited knowledge from an even earlier technological civilization. The Mahabharata describes these weapons being used in battle. Cities destroyed, armies annihilated, land rendered uninhabitable. Archaeological sites in India show evidence of ancient vitrification, sand and rock melted by intense heat, far hotter than any known natural fire. These sites are dismissed as natural phenomena, lightning strikes or volcanic activity. But they appear in areas where the ancient texts describe weapon usage. The patterns are disturbing, the correlation troubling. Ancient texts describing weapons of mass destruction, archaeological evidence of extreme heat damage, legends warning about catastrophic wars that nearly destroyed civilization. Number 10 takes us to the Hakatha laws of the Babylonians, a legal text from 1800 BCE that includes regulations for flying machine operation. This isn't mythology or religious text, this is law. The Code of Hammurabi is famous, but lesser-known Babylonian legal documents contain provisions that seem impossible for their era. These laws establish liability for flying machine accidents. If a pilot loses control and damages property, specific compensation is required. The amounts vary based on what was destroyed. If someone is killed by a falling machine or its cargo, the pilot or owner faces severe penalties, including potential execution depending on the victim's social status. These are practical regulations for actual safety concerns. Nobody creates detailed legal liability frameworks for imaginary technology. The laws also regulate flight paths. Certain areas are restricted. Machines must maintain minimum altitude over populated areas. Night flights require special authorization. These are air traffic control regulations from nearly 4,000 years ago. Another section addresses pilot qualifications, requirements for training, experience minimums before independent operation, medical standards for those who operate flying machines. This is aviation licensing from ancient Babylon. The penalties for violations were specific: flying without authorization, fines based on wealth, operating an unsafe machine, seizure of the craft, causing death through negligence, corporal punishment, or execution. Dr. Samuel Kramer from the University of Pennsylvania translated numerous Babylonian legal texts in the 1960s. These flight regulations appeared in several documents. His initial papers mentioned them briefly. He called them curiously specific provisions. Then he stopped referencing them entirely. When questioned decades later, He claimed they were metaphorical regulations for divine vehicles. But laws don't regulate metaphors. They regulate real activities with real consequences. The specificity is telling. Distance requirements, altitude minimums, weight restrictions, passenger limits. These are engineering and safety constraints for actual aircraft operation. The laws also address ownership disputes. If two people claim the same flying machine, evidence of construction or purchase determines rightful owner. Regulations for lending machines to others, liability if borrowed craft causes damage, requirements for maintaining machines in safe condition. This is contract law applied to aviation. The Babylonian texts also mention guilds of machine builders, craftsmen who specialized in construction and maintenance, standards for their training and certification. These documents describe an entire aviation industry, regulated by law, supported by specialized labor, subject to liability and safety requirements. The legal frameworks are sophisticated. They address complex scenarios. They anticipate problems that only arise from actual operation. These aren't primitive people imagining flight. These are administrators regulating an existing technology. The laws assume flying machines are common enough to require regulation, dangerous enough to warrant liability provisions, valuable enough to need ownership protections. From 1800 BCE, when humans supposedly couldn't fly for another 3,700 years, 10 ancient texts from civilizations scattered across the globe, India, Tibet, China, Egypt, Babylon, Peru, separated by thousands of miles, separated by different languages and cultures. Yet they describe the same thing: flying machines. Not vague mythology about gods floating on clouds, detailed technical documentation, engineering specifications, operational procedures, legal regulations, combat tactics, maintenance schedules. The Vaimanika Shastra provides construction materials and propulsion systems. The Mahabharata describes aerial warfare with disturbing precision. Tibetan texts document space travel observations. Chinese manuscripts detail jet engine principles 1,500 years early. The Babylonian legal codes regulate aviation liability. The Samarangana Sutradhara reads like an operator's manual. The Nazca lines only make sense from altitude. The pattern is undeniable. Ancient civilizations possessed knowledge of aviation. Whether they built these machines themselves or inherited information from earlier peoples, the documentation exists. These texts have been translated by legitimate scholars. The specifications have been analyzed by qualified engineers. The conclusions are consistent. The technology described is aerodynamically sound. The physics are legitimate. The operational procedures are practical. Yet mainstream archaeology rejects this evidence. The texts are dismissed as mythology despite their technical precision. The researchers are marginalized despite their qualifications. The patterns are ignored despite their consistency. Why? Because accepting this evidence means rewriting human history. It means acknowledging that technological progress isn't linear, that ancient peoples achieved capabilities we assume are modern, that knowledge can be lost, civilizations can fall, technology can disappear, and maybe already has. The implications are uncomfortable. Our modern achievements become less unique. Our timeline of progress becomes questionable. Our assumptions about ancient peoples become wrong. So the evidence gets buried, translations relegated to obscure journals, research dismissed as fringe scholarship, patterns explained away as coincidence. But the texts remain, preserved for thousands of years, waiting in museums and archives and private collections. Anyone can read them. Anyone can examine the technical specifications. Anyone can see the patterns. The Vaimanika Shastra still describes mercury vortex propulsion. The Mahabharata still details aerial combat. The Babylonian laws still regulate flight operations. The evidence has been presented. The patterns revealed. Whether ancient humans built these machines, inherited knowledge from a lost civilization, or documented visitors from elsewhere, The texts describe aviation technology thousands of years before modern flight. What you believe is your choice to make. But remember this: truth doesn't disappear because it's inconvenient. Evidence doesn't vanish because it contradicts accepted narratives. The ancient texts describe flying machines in remarkable, technical, impossible to dismiss detail. That's not theory. That's documentation. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. Stay free.